All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Once again, my name is Bryce London. I'm a director with the Retail Coach. Want to welcome everybody to the part one of the webinar series. We've got a lot of topics to cover. I really appreciate everybody joining us. We're going to try and get this in an hour, so we got a lot of sections to cover. A few housekeeping things to talk about. Everybody is in listen mode. But if you look at the control panel on your webinar, there is a place for you to ask questions. We'll be trying to answer those questions throughout the webinar, but if we can't get to those, I promise we'll follow up each individually afterwards. So feel free to post on those questions. You can send it directly to us, or you can send it to everybody. We have visibility. We can log those. So I promise if we can't answer it during the webinar, we will get your questions answered, reaching out to you individually. So part one of the webinar series, I know you saw the invites. We sent it by email. We talked to a lot of you. What we really wanted to do was we wanted to create kind of a two-part webinar series. Well, we covered kind of in the first part kind of more of a macro, high-level overview of where retail is today. You know, what are the current trends? You know, what are the effects of the internet, e-commerce? You know, what can the communities do at a higher level to position themselves to attract retail? And then with the second part here in a few weeks, we'll kind of move into more of the micro, the specific marketing techniques, some of the specific reports, how to use those, how to understand those. So we've got a lot to cover. Before we kind of jump into it, I wanted to introduce both myself and the other presenter, Scott. So what you're looking at is the leadership team from the Retail Coach. So Kelly Kofer is the owner and CEO. Aaron Farmer, which probably a lot of you have seen, heard on some of the webinar. He's the Senior Vice President. He's traveling today, but we wanted to make sure to introduce him. Scott Emerson, he will be talking about the clicks versus bricks and community development here in a little bit. So Scott is a director, just like myself, with the Retail Coach, and then Bryce London, director as well. So wanted to make sure you kind of knew who we were, who was talking to you, who the voice on the other end of the line was. For those of you who aren't aware, who might have gotten the invite or not, familiar with who we are as a company, the Retail Coach, we started over 16 years ago. Kelly Kofer was working as a national site selector for a retailer, and he was traveling around the country and really kind of saw an opportunity that some of the communities that he was talking to, could use some help in how to properly recruit and attract retail. And so he started the Retail Coach over 16 years ago. We've worked for over 400 different communities to develop retail recruitment strategies, as well as recruit the retail on behalf of the communities. Something that we're really proud of and I think is a tribute to our business model and what we take pride in, and some of the core tenets of the company and our service is, throughout our history and all the communities that we worked with, we have an 88% repeat client, meaning in some form or fashion, 88% of our customers continue their service with us, and that's something we take a lot of pride in. I know, a lot of you on the line are familiar with our services. We've had an opportunity to talk to you, but that's something that we're always focusing on. It's a core tenet of ours, and it's attributed to our approach with the communities and really developing a true partnership with the communities that we work for. So I wanted to introduce the company and who we were. But like I said, we got a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and jump into it. So what we're going to be covering today is kind of, like I talked about, a high-level overview of some really important topics. I mean, each one of these we could spend an hour, 2 hours on individually, and we do. We do a lot of these presentations around the country. I know Scott was last week. He was in the Northeast giving a clicks versus bricks presentation. A lot of conferences around the country. So we wanted to kind of condense multiple topics into a 1 hour webinar. So feel free, please ask as many questions as you can. We promise we'll get all your questions answered. I would love to talk individually and more in depth on each one of these. But we're going to kind of talk about where retail is today. You know, what are some of the market forces affecting retail? What does it mean for the community? Who's expanding? Who's contracting? You know, why are they expanding? Why are they contracting? Scott's going to cover clicks versus bricks, and basically what that is how is the e-commerce affecting the retailers? You know, you hear a lot about the Amazon influence on the retailers. You know, how are these retailers combating that? You know, are they embracing it? You know, who's successful, who's not? You know, how are they going to develop their business models in this new age of the internet, e-commerce? You know, personalization due to the availability of the online tools. We're also going to talk about community development. You know, how as a community, you know, can you position yourselves to attract retail? You know, and one of the things from our company standpoint is everything that we try and do is from the eyes of the retailer. So community development, we always say, precedes economic development. So Scott's going to talk a lot about what's important, you know, how to position the community. And then we've also got a section on site selection. You know, it's talked about a lot, but, you know, what are the driving forces for these site selectors? What are they looking for? How can the communities put themselves higher up in that pecking order when you start talking about these site selectors and how they're approaching their job, what they're looking for, what's important to them, what's not important to them. So, like I said, a lot to cover. Once again, ask questions if you have them. We'll promise we'll get them answered either in the webinar or individually afterwards. So retail today and retail tomorrow. You know, this is truly a revolutionary time as far as retail goes. You've got you know, the generational changes, the onset of the millennials. You've got the older generation, the retirees, the baby boomers. I mean, each one of those generations have a significantly different opinion of retail. They have a very different approach to how they shop, how they want to shop, how they're marketed to. Never in the history have these retailers had as much information on their customers. You know, what do you do with that? You know, the Internet of Things. I mean, each device that we have and we use talks to each other. The retailers have that information. You know, and each one of them are trying to determine how to best use that. You know, pre-09, you know, you had the urban sprawl, you know, people moving out to the suburbs, retailers following, moving out with them. You know, now you have more of an urbanization going on, people kind of moving back into the downtown areas, back into the cities. You know, you've got all the lessons learned from the 2009 recession. I mean, these site selectors and these retailers are just absolutely, you know, have learned a lot of lessons about, you know, opening up in maybe tier 2, tier 3 sites. I mean, how they're approaching what they're doing and making sure that they've got all the data to support the expansion. You know, it's truly is, it's exciting. It's a transition point in the industry, and I think it's important, certainly for us and for everybody on this call, to really understand, you know, kind of what's going on with these retailers and how they're adjusting to the industry, how they're adjusting to the people. Because ultimately, you know, what we want to do is we want to position all of our communities, everybody on the line, and wants to position themselves to benefit and to attract that retail, you know, for the residents in the community, and certainly from the financial aspect. You know, I just talked about it, but really the overriding theme, you know, what's going on as far as retail today, is kind of urbanization. Population is shifting back to these urban centers. The millennial generation, the younger gen, is driving that. You know, but it's not just the millennials doing that. You know, overall, you know, most age groups, most generations, they're looking for that third place. They're looking for that live, work, play convenience. You know, you've read a lot of articles. We travel around the country, and you know, some of these the suburbs are actually trying to create that as well. you know, you've got a lot of the communities that we work for. They've got that vibrant downtown, or they're trying to revitalize that vibrant downtown. Overall, everybody is looking for that city center, that lifestyle center. You know, these retailers are really trying to maximize social shopping, cross shopping. You know, it's getting that millennial who wants to go have coffee with some friends and then go stop by the store, you know, and then maybe has dinner, or maybe it's the mom, you know, going on a play date with a few friends, and they go to a lifestyle center, a city center that has an open space with some restaurants and a coffee center. You know, they can let the kids play, have some coffee, and then afterwards go to the store afterwards. You know, so that's what people are looking for. So certainly the urban areas, the downtowns is ideal for that. You know, but from a community standpoint, you know, be thinking about how you can kind of create these you know, mixed-use development, these community centers, you know, the place where you can truly give that live, work, play. You know, that's kind of driving a lot of the retail expansion and a lot of the developments around the country. It's really prevalent. You know, like I said, the millennial generation is certainly driving that, but at the same time, you know, all population, all generation age groups are looking for that as well. So it's a really important concept. It's something to understand, and these retailers are really starting to really dive into understanding the needs of their customers. So, wanted to talk about from an annual growth standpoint, based off of all the information and everything that we follow. In 2016, we're expecting a little over a 4% growth in total retail sales. So you see in 2015, 4.6, 2016, 4.4. You know, from the macroeconomic standpoint, on both ends of the financial spectrum, you know, people are spending money. It's a controlled growth. You know, these retailers are being very cautious in their expansion. They're looking for kind of the sure thing, but there is growth. These retailers are growing, and they need to grow. And it's finding out that right market for them to expand to, and making sure that they've got all the information needed from the demographics, you know, and making sure that they're connecting with the correct customer base. So we expect growth. You know, it's going to be across different categories of the retail industry, restaurants. You're really starting to see, you know, kind of certain, you know, retailers and restaurants kind of separate themselves and how they're approaching their business models and how they're interacting with their customers. You know, but bottom line is retail is going to grow, you know, and we expect it to grow. So, you know, over 40,000, you know, new planned openings. That's documented. That's what we know right now. In the next 2 years, you're talking, you know, just under 80,000. You know, Scott will talk about it a lot more in length, but you know, you hear a lot about how the onset of e-commerce is just killing brick and mortars, and there's not going to be any, you know, openings. I mean, and certainly these retailers are adjusting to the e-commerce, but it's not. It doesn't mean that the brick and mortar locations are not going to be opening. It's a matter of how they interact with the e-commerce to really drive that omni-channel approach. And Scott's going to talk much more about that. But I wanted to make sure, you know, retail, there are openings planned. You know, we follow, you know, all the retailers. They're opening. It's just a matter of making sure that they've got everything in order, and the communities are giving them everything they need to make sure that when they open, they're opening in the location that they want. So I kind of talked about it, but before we kind of get into all the different, you know, who's expanding, who's not, CNBC did a study, and basically what you're seeing right now is the stores and the retailers that are opening are those that have really updated and updated their business models to account for all these new market forces that are going on, the Amazon effect, the Internet of Things, the big data. You know, like I said on the onset, these retailers have never had the amount of information about their customers they do now. And so, what you're seeing is some of these especially from the national brands. What you're seeing is the retailers that are going to be kind of left behind are those that just haven't adapted to the new normal, to the new tools and techniques that they have available to them. So, what you're going to see in 2016, 2017 is really these retailers that have kind of adapted their approach and revolutionized, how they do business, how they interact and market to their customers. Those are going to be the ones who are really going to expand and grow, and certainly the type of category they're in, what's popular in today, and from the consumer standpoint. So what we see, from 2015 on to 2016, some of the categories that we're seeing expansion across the U.S. You've got your fitness, health spa concept. That Snap Fitness, Fitness Revolution, your Orange Theory. A lot of these smaller footprint stores that can go into, that can fit into some of these power centers, retail centers, and attract, some of these specialty fitness places. Certainly the smaller format, the grocers, your Whole Foods, your Trader Joe's, your smaller organic grocers. We're seeing tremendous growth with those. Fast foods, the fast casual. 70% of all restaurant growth in the next year or two will be fast casual. That's what you're talking about. Your Chipotle's, Zoe's Kitchen, Noodles and Company, Nukes, Panera Bread. Restaurants like that. The fast casual is really expanding. Your discount stores, your dollar stores, are seeing growth all over the country in those, and your sporting goods. So those are some of the general categories that we're seeing growth around the country. Some of those stores, like we just talked about, your off-price retailers and your discount stores, your TJ Maxx, your Ross, your Nordstrom Rack. Nordstrom, they opened the Nordstrom Rack, and really it's really affected their main stores. But we're seeing growth with TJ Maxx and Ross. And that's millennial generation, honestly, is driving a lot of that. A lot of the surveys have been done, and millennials, they want to get a good deal. They want to feel like they got a deal, and these TJ Maxxes and Rosses have really elevated their in-store experience, and they benefit from it. They're attracting a much wider customer base than they have in the past. Walmart, you're going to see some growth, and I'm going to show you a slide here, a couple slides that where both Walmart's going to be opening and closing stores, and that's them experimenting with their business model. We talked about the Chipotle's, Panera Bread, Smashburger, that fast casuals growth, and obviously with the organic grocers, the Whole Foods, the Sprouts, the Fresh Market. All four of these are going to be growing, and they're going to be opening up stores. Some more, the Family Dollar, Dollar Tree. Tremendous growth around the country. Talked about Dick's Sporting Goods. Most of you probably saw. They're going to take over the naming rights and Sports Authority. So, that 150 might increase. Sephora, Ulta. Some of these beauty supplies. A lot of these are really capitalizing on taking away some of the sales from the beauty and makeup, taking that away from the Macy's and the Dillards. That's hurt those major anchors. Cabela, Steinmeier. So these are just some of what we're seeing and what we're expecting over the next couple of years from the growth. Some more of these talked about: TJ Maxx, Ross, Costco, these athletic apparels. Really, the Nike, Under Armour, Columbia, North Face, the Lululemon. I can tell you, I think my wife is contributing to a lot of the growth of Lululemon. It's unreal. I'm in Houston. It's unreal how much you see that around town. Home Depot, Lowe's, growth. The Williams Sonora, Restoration Hardware, some of that unique experience stores, that can offer everything that offer that experience, that shopping boutiqueness. Those are the type of the retailers that are really expanding. Right now, I wanted to show you kind of what are we looking at from a shopping center profile around the country. And this is important because what we use this for is when we are evaluating markets and we're evaluating retail districts within the community, we want to make sure that the retailers that we're targeting, that we've got, that we're kind of fitting this profile. Typically most shopping centers are, 20% of that shopping center is your major anchor, Kohl's, Home Depot, Target. Then you got a little over 40%. That's kind of your junior anchor, and we're seeing growth in the junior anchors. I mean, that's evolving where that 40% might be higher in the next year or two. You got the 10 to 15%, small shops, maybe your independents. And really one of the things that we're also seeing a lot around the country is grocery anchored retail centers, maybe more so than in the past. And that's because these groceries have kind of been a little bit more resilient to the e-commerce effect. I mean, typically, people still want to go to a grocery store, feel, touch, what they're buying. So, grocery anchored retail centers are really going to be, we're going to see growth around the country from that aspect. So some change going on, but it's important to kind of understand what does a typical shopping center look like, because we want to make sure from a recruitment standpoint that we're kind of fitting this model, that we're making sure that we've got both, the major anchors and the small, both national and independent retailers represented in everything that we're doing and how we're evaluating the different markets. Some of the stores that are going to be contracting, I mean, certainly the bookstores have just been absolutely crushed by the e-commerce. Although some of them are kind of evolving now, and they're offering, they have a coffee store in there, they've got a kids section, they've got the Read with Kids classes, so they're trying to reinvent themselves as well. But overall, they have not been able to compete with the Amazon effect and the ability to buy, books online. Video stores, I mean, the much publicized downfall of Blockbuster, they just have not been able to compete with the online, the Netflix, the HBO Go, all the different options for video viewing that there's out there. And we talked about the mid-priced apparel and grocery. I mean, that just, due to the macroeconomics and what's going on in the U.S., just the financial income levels, and kind of separating between the lower income, higher income. I mean, the mid-priced grocery and apparel have been hit because of that, and they're trying to, that's why you see some of these new groceries coming in, the organic grocers who can, demand a little bit more profit margins. They can benefit from that. Office supplies, stationery. I mean, I know everyone remembers the Hallmark stores on every street corner. Just with the online options and the different things available to the consumer. You're just seeing significant contraction. From those. Retail contraction. I mean, there has been a tremendous amount of stuff written about Macy's, Sears, Nordstrom. Bottom line is the Macy's of the world. I mean, to their answer to the e-commerce was they were going to offer a significant discount option within their store, and it's been to their detriment where they've really hurt their margins. They just hired a new CEO, and they're going to try and create more of an in-store experience. They're going to allow pop-up stores and to kind of create more of a destination. Sears they've tried every different approach in the past 5 years that they can. They have apparel, luxury and discount apparel. Certainly you got the appliances, but Macy's, Sears, right now, Sears is just really, really struggling. Macy's, we'll see what the new CEO and kind of as they look at the different things. But I mean, I know a lot of people who are aware of the different malls and the Macy's leaving. That's something to look for. And the Walmart, I told you a couple slides ago they're going to be opening stores. They're also going to be closing stores, and what that's doing is they're really looking at their business model, and in some of their neighborhood markets and their super centers are growing and they're going to expand. But they open up these express stores to really combat the Dollar Generals and the Family Dollars of the world, and those just haven't taken off. And so, they're going to be closing some of those stores. So, just like I said in the onset, all these retailers, and Walmart's not immune to this. They're all really experimenting in how they can adapt their business models to the new customers, to the multi-generation customers, as well as the effect of e-commerce. Office supply stores have just been, crushed. With the online options. So they're closing some stores, and they're also downsizing their square footage. And the Nordstrom we talked about, they're trying to recreate some of their in-store experience. I saw this morning, I saw something came through my email where they just hired a new supply chain partner to really try and drive some more online sales and to really combine the in-store and online experience. Where Wall Street sees the future, kind of like what we talked about. Amazon has seen, since 2015, significant increase in their stock price. You see the Best Buys that have really struggled to combat the e-commerce. Walmart, Sears, Macy, some of the stock price changes. So what you're really seeing is the stores that have adapted and are adapting to all the new new market forces affecting retail today are doing well, but there's some that still have to get there and are struggling right now. I'm going to go ahead and, I know I went through that really quick, and like I said, we can ask questions and we can circle back, but I wanted to make sure that we get through all the topics. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott, and Scott's going to kind of go into more detail about the future of retail from the e-commerce side of it, the clicks versus brick.
Thank you, Bryce. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Scott Emerson. I'm a director of retail strategy with the Retail Coach. What I want to talk about now, Bryce talked a lot about maybe some negative impacts that it looks like a lot of retailers are contracting, but I do want to put the message out there that the future is bright for retail. Bricks and mortar stores are not going away. We see them adapting their models and looking for new ways to present their goods to customers, but we feel like the online impact, certainly we have to be aware of that. We have to address it, and as communities, specifically smaller communities, we need to figure out ways to encourage and promote business. But I want to talk real quickly about the online impact, how some of our retailers are going to survive and thrive, and then what can we do to help our retail base. I'll throw this up real quickly because I think this is kind of explains the online shopping theory that we all have. It's a bookshop, looks like it's closing down, and it says all the books are a penny, but yet the folks still say, I might see if they're cheaper online. We're all guilty of it. We all like that Amazon box to come to our back door, but the question is at what point do we look at the local impact and see what's going on? Nationwide, this is an ongoing thing with legislation as to what's going on with our taxes and how do we address that? How do local sales tax, state sales tax, how do we go and collect that sales tax locally for those goods that are being bought? It's something that's going on, and basically at the current time, what's going on is that we can only collect sales tax if, say, Amazon or Walmart or whoever you're purchasing online has a store or an office or a warehouse, within your city or within your district. That's the only way we can currently, and you obviously buy from them and you're within that state, is the only way we can collect sales tax at the time. So there's ongoing discussions going on. I know it's not just the local and the state level, but also at the federal level to try to identify that. There's another, I think I've got another. Let's look at this one real quick. So showrooming is something that, our local retailers are having to address, but this one, somebody went in and basically said, this pair is so perfect, I can't wait to buy them cheaper online somewhere, and then wants to know what the Wi-Fi password is. So not only, is this person going to buy online and not impact the local economy at all, but what's worse is that she's probably negatively impacted that local economy by taking up this guy's time and going and viewing the item first and then going and buying it online. So showrooming is something, that local retailers, we talk to Main Streets and do workshops all the time. It's something we have to address. You have the local good close to them. How do we market our prices? How do we make the experience of purchasing in that retail something that makes them want to buy local instead of having it, buying it online? So what is the local impact? The online impact is, that retail sales are going to grow at a compound annual rate of 10% from 2012 to 2017. By 2017, what the numbers we're seeing is that the web is going to account for 10% of all U.S. retail sales. That's significant because you see that compounding annual rate. It's only going to continue to grow. We found this to be interesting, is that this Nielsen report showed that 37% of shoppers start on a mobile device. So they're starting to look for that item. 72% are researching an item or checking prices on a smartphone before they buy. But what's significant about that is that only 21% of those actually bought the item on a smartphone after going to a physical location. So we're still seeing that the majority are inclined to make their purchases in stores. So with that information, looking at national retail chains, let's look at those that are doing well. They're all addressing online sales and ways to do it better. So if they're doing that, why should the small, we feel like the small town merchant, some of these independents and regional guys, but also some of the smaller national brands, they need to address their model. And we're seeing that in multiple ways. They're not only addressing that on the online sales side, so trying to rev up that marketing effort, but we're also seeing that, and they are reducing their physical store size. So reevaluating their current model. Bryce talked a little bit about Walmart and what's going on there. They're evaluating every single market idea that's going on. And we're seeing this nationally. Best Buy going from 50, 60,000 square foot stores down to 25, 30,000 square foot stores. A lot of your grocery chains, the days of the 130,000 square foot mega grocery store, are maybe slim in the future. They're starting to look at smaller models that are closer to neighborhoods. We're seeing that with Walmart Neighborhood Market. Certainly Dollar General has picked up on that and benefited financially for sure. So you remember that earlier slide that I showed you. So 10% of the web will account for 10% of all U.S. retail sales. Well, that means that there's still 90% of all U.S. retail sales out there that are still going to occur in a brick and mortar site somewhere. That's significant because that allows us to, hope for the future that brick and mortar stores are going to stay around. Folks still want to shop. I give it's sort of a corny example, but I give this all the time, is that, my mom is one of those that wants to go to the local grocery store. She's not going to shop her groceries at Walmart. We feel like there is a movement within some of the younger generations. Bryce talked about urbanization and these folks coming back to the metropolitan areas. We feel like there is enough need and enough desire, and the fact that 90% of those of all retail sales will still occur in a brick and mortar site, that show hope for brick and mortar stores for the future. See if I can get it to change here. So this was a study that was done, 3,300 U.S. consumers. They were all ages 15 and plus, but this 2016 study basically shows, the internet shopping growth is expected to sharply slow in the next 3 years. What we have seen is that, online shopping had its rev up, its big debut probably 2, 3, 4 years ago, where really everybody took on their Amazon Prime accounts. Everybody started looking online before they purchased locally anyways. And so what we're saying is that trend is not going to continue forever. That growth trend, now yes, it's going to continue to grow, but it's not going to grow at the rate that we've seen in the past. So of this consumer group that were of responses here that came back from this study, the majority do not plan to spend more online on products. 25% plan to spend less on several categories, including beverages and fine jewelry. More than twice the number of respondents that said they will spend less online than those who plan to spend more. And what's, I think, interesting from this study is that responses were the same across all age groups: millennials, Generation Xers, and baby boomers. We try to, I think a lot of times the stigma comes that online shopping is sort of a new wave trend, and that the millennials, the Generation X, Y, Zs, those are the ones that are really driving online sales. But I think this study goes to show, and we've seen other research that shows, the baby boomer age, they're computer users too. Everybody has a smartphone in their hand these days. So e-commerce and m-commerce are definitely not necessarily specific to one age group. So most consumer categories have been available online for several years. That's what I was saying. The newness is gone. There are mature levels of penetration in many categories, and we're starting to see some of these categories, make a shift and turn and come back to us. Bryce mentioned grocery stores, but I'd also say, furniture sales are something that we're starting to see come back local. We're starting to see guys like Ashley Furniture and some of these bigger bigger name furniture brands starting to open up more and more stores because it, you know, some of these goods are not necessarily set up for the online model. We kind of compare online shopping growth as sort of similar to the growth experienced in the 1970s and 80s by catalog merchants. Sears was one of those, you know, even earlier than that, the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Sears really hit the catalog merchants, but, you know, you think back to that generation and what it was like to get a catalog and the fact that you could bulk order items, or you could order items that weren't necessarily in your rural market or wherever you lived in the United States. You could order those by catalog, and it set the pace for what was to become. Categories likely to have continued significant growth include travel and entertainment, for such things as theater tickets. Those things make sense. You know, I don't guess you could say I'm a proponent of online shopping or a proponent of necessarily brick and mortar stores. That's where our business is, obviously, but it makes a lot of sense for things such as theater tickets and things that are easily tangible that make sense to go online. You know, I think the days of a box office, days of buying your movie tickets at a box office are probably going to slim down in the future. So products with the highest online penetration. You know, we see obviously books. You know, Amazon has completely wiped out almost most of our big box booksellers. They're completely having to change their model. You know, electronics, consumer electronics are something that you know, has been really hit with online shopping. That's one of those things that's fairly easy. The products that are out there are fairly stable, and those consumer electronics are easy to be bought online. But what's not easy to be bought online are groceries. You know, people still want to touch their food, see their food, pick that out selectively. Home improvement are things that folks need fairly quickly, so they don't have time to wait a day or two or three for things to come in for a home improvement project. And then, like I said, home furnishings. We're really seeing furniture turn full circle and come back to where, you know, it's not easy. You get this big, huge box of a piece of furniture you just bought. You get instructions in the box, and then, you know, all the pieces may be there, may not be there, but then also, you know, you still have to put it together. And then what if it's not what you like? You know, it doesn't have really an ease of sending something back like that through online shopping. So we're seeing, you know, like I said, groceries, home improvement, home furnishings, those things with high levels of customer service and things that you need immediately are turning back to brick and mortar stores. So like we said, omni-channel is going to be the new normal. 82% of online shoppers start to purchase on one device and finish on another. So, you know, the mode is going to be that we're going to have to address sort of a hybrid model of this. It's going to take multiple, you know, online shopping understands it already. Folks start on a mobile device. They may finish that purchase on their computer at night, and ultimately they're still getting those sales. So how do we address that with our existing retailers and our merchants, and how are national brands addressing that? Well, they're looking at multi-channel shopping. So they're going to have a very strong online presence, but they're also going to have a very strong store presence. You know, what we're seeing is that multi-channel shoppers shop more often and will spend over 3 times more than single-channel shoppers. That's important. You know, cross-shopping, we always talked about when we had retailers and recruiting retailers, that you needed to encourage cross-shopping. You needed to encourage, you know, multiple shops and multiple buying options and multiple experiences there. Online shopping certainly is addressing this, but we need to get it so that our retailers are able to take advantage of multi-channel shopping. So today's consumers prefer ease and experience. We talked about that. Shopping in a physical store should be a fun, a social, and a rewarding experience that can't be replicated online. You know, what we're giving the gold stars to, you know, the winners of that branch are those that embrace multi-channel retailers who recognize the nuances of how people want to purchase their particular product. So if it's a Yeti cooler that I want to purchase online, I know what those prices are online, but when I go to the store, they have the other goods and services that I need. I have a customer service level that I appreciate and feel like I can trust. The prices are comparable to what I just found online. Those are the things, and we feel like multi-channel shopping and increasing the number of ways that you're embracing that consumer are what's going to set us apart for the future. For many tactile items, a store and a website can work together. That's what we're saying. The store is for seeing and touching. That's that showrooming effect. And the website can be the ease and convenience of purchasing. So what we're telling a lot of the retailers we work with is that, you know, even our independent merchant that may be a small town bookseller needs to address the website and online shopping. You need to have a good online presence to be able to do both. Use research to educate your existing retail base. A lot of communities we work in, we provide a lot of market data. We really need to look at those market reports and how they how we can use those to educate our existing retail base. We need to know what our retail trade area is. We need to host business workshops. We need to look at stakeholders and place on a city website. You know, the data dictates what your community can support. We need to foster an environment for successful retail. We talked about community development precedes economic development, but you also need, you know, all of these things that are listed here: functional infrastructure, streets, parking, lighting, community branding and marketing is something here. Embrace complementary versus competitive businesses. Special events programs to draw residents and visitors to retail centers. All of these things are very important to the existing business environment that you are creating and that overall experience of what we're trying to attract. So real quickly, I'm going to talk about community development. One thing that we think is important is how to improve your curb appeal. Again, I'm going to state it again because I want everybody to understand that community development precedes economic development. You must start from that macro level and address some of the issues that are going on in your community before we can look at individual economic development successes. Improving first impressions is critical. Community appearance, the pride of ownership, and that's not just with commercial and retail, that's also on the residential level, but functional infrastructure, you know, that's from a city standpoint. If you've got 60-year-old infrastructure and you haven't updated anything in 60 years, that says something about your business market and what you're doing to be proactive to attract new businesses and to attract new development. Evidence of crime, codes and code enforcement. We see this across a lot of the communities we work with, is that a lot of times your ordinances or your codes or your zoning laws are not necessarily beneficial to retailers coming in. And I'm not saying bend your back and do those things, but at least have regulations set aside and code enforcement that work with retail and work with new development and have some sort of cohesive nature about it, creating that type of district or that type of city that you want. And urban vitality. Key factors for community development success. It starts with proactive leaders with a vision. A lot of you signed on this webinar today. That's a start. So if, you know, I feel like it starts with leaders that have a vision, and then you need to basically get a coalition of informed, interested stakeholders with a passion and a vision. So you need to start that discussion somewhere. Community development is, you know, we talk about this, it's all facets of your community. It's not just retail, it's not just industrial growth, it's not just residential growth, it's not just tourism, but you need to get everybody together. So all citizen groups and all city departments working together for a common goal. But more importantly than anything is that you need to have a defined plan with a mission and your goals set aside and your strategy laid out there in front of you. You need to know where your community is going to stand 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road in all of those categories that I just talked about. Whether that's a comprehensive plan, whether that's a retail strategy, whether that's something that just gives you a pace guide and the answers to some of the reasons that stack up against your vision. So you don't want to give away a piece of property to a smaller developer or a lower class developer for retail that could potentially be a large power center 2 years down the road. Have that vision and what the overall community looks like 5, 10, 20 years down the road. So is your community a destination to live, work, shop, and play? We see this across the country. You know, every city website typically, you know, 2 years ago set up this setup where basically wanted to set themselves out as a community offering the best opportunities to live, work, shop, and play. You know, you have to evaluate where you stand from an outsider's perspective. And that starts with community branding. You know, you need to create a gateway or district, infrastructure upgrades that I talked about, building aesthetics improvement, you know, decreasing the vacancy and stabilizing the buildings that you have, encouraging better business practices, encouraging complementary and competitive businesses, and then encourage community involvement. You wouldn't believe how important that is to the core of your community and the development thereof. So brand your district. You know, this is talking about creating an identity. You know, we see this across the country where communities have success when they come in and basically say, here is our downtown, or here's who we want to be. We've worked with downtown Oakland Park, Florida for a while, and they have a unique branding about their downtown, and they basically set it out and said, we want to be a culinary arts district, and this is who we want to be, and these are the types of retailers we want here. They set out and branded that. So there's no doubt that when you enter that district, you know what you're looking at. It also helps to basically just flag your area. We see a lot, you know, in metropolitan areas where you have basically city limits against city limits against city limits, and you're competing with those cities. You know, it helps to brand and make yours be, you know, bright and definitely brand that district so that everybody knows where they are. They know what district they are in town, and it looks very proactive and progressive on your part. Another way you can do that is with wayfinding and signage. You wouldn't believe the impact that you can have from just a simple wayfinding campaign where you come in and update your street signs or update, you know, we work with a lot of communities that may have a tourism effect. Well, if you can't get those folks that are in your city touring whatever place or park or whatever it is you have in your town, attracting those folks, if you can't get them from that park to downtown, then, you know, you haven't succeeded really in attracting them for retail. So signage and cohesive signage is something that we feel like is very important. This should also play right into your signage ordinances that retailers and other businesses have. You know, a cohesive signing regulation or an ordinance across your town can have significant impact. Corridor enhancement programs and downtown streetscape projects. So in your comprehensive plan or in your overall strategy for your town, you know, you need to look at these gateways. You need to look at what infrastructure you have. So take it a district at a time if you need to break it down into smaller sections. But we need to look at what are the gateways and how can we improve those. This is basically looking at not only the infrastructure needs, but also the aesthetic improvements. Remember what I said, those first impressions are crucial. So if you can get that visitor to come once, you've succeeded. If you can get them to come twice, 3 times, 4 times, every time they come to town, you've done your job, and your city's doing everything it can to embrace that. So again, infrastructure and aesthetic improvements. It starts with sidewalks, you know, bricks and lighting, you know, getting rid of overhead lighting poles and adding landscaping. You know, this is sort of a move across the country. The town where our home office is located just recently went through about a $4 or $5 million downtown street improvement project where they, you know, put all new curbs, sidewalks, lighting, light poles, landscaping in downtown, and you wouldn't believe the effect it had. Not just from showing that your community is vital and open for business, but just increasing that experience of getting out of my car and walking to that retail store or that eating establishment. Lifestyle centers, we see this across the country. You know, malls are sort of the yesterday of retail big box stores. We're seeing that lifestyle centers are starting to try to basically do what? Recreate that downtown effect. And a lot of you already have that existing infrastructure in place. It just sometimes needs upgrading or enhanced. Again, park benches, landscaping, all these things, awnings, cohesive signage, all these things go together to work together for the common goal. You know, we show this. We feel like, you know, every community across the country ought to be unique, ought to be creative. So, you know, come in and allow things that create a district within your town, but also, you know, be creative in that and be open to new ideas. It's that experience that we're going after. We always say be original. We ran across this business at one point. It was a guy owned a chiropractor shop, but he also really liked coffee. So what did he do? He opened up the front storefront as a coffee house, and you could get your chiropractic needs in the back. That business model doesn't necessarily exist in every community, but be open and be an original. We've seen other models of this across the country. I show this as sort of a gateway. This was a town in Mississippi I've worked with in the past, but how simply does aesthetics and a gateway to your community affect folks knowing this was a situation where we had a major highway, downtown sat 2 blocks off of it running parallel to that major highway, and nobody ever knew it existed. But how can you come in and create a gateway? So easy things such as landscaping, adding things, getting rid of the overhead power lines and coming in and adding signage and wayfinding that definitely shows that route to downtown, but showing also that this is the entrance to our downtown. We want you to get off the main path and come and see what we're about. It could be as simple as looking across the inventory of buildings that you have. And I'm talking a lot about downtown, but these are the cores that really show how well your business environment is doing. It could be as simple as stabilizing a building, but it also could be finding the right people that could come in and maybe do a rehabilitation or restoration of the building. So like I said, look beyond just stabilization of those buildings, but you got to do whatever you can to decrease vacancy and decrease the blight or the eyesores in your community. And that may be a downtown building, but it also may be a 60s gas station sitting on the most prominent corner in your building. An example of that would be something like this. We all have these in our community, and you probably drive by these day in, day out, but what can you do to create an experience? And it doesn't have to be a full transformation, but it could be something as easy as looking into your ordinances and your zoning, but also finding the right person that could recreate that and create an experience there for retail. Businesses must operate as a business and not a hobby. You need to encourage better business practices. We come into a lot of towns, especially working with downtowns and your independent and regional brands, and they have signs like this on the door that say close the door at 3:50, or they completely are missing the market. They're selling $40 candles in a service area that probably can only buy $5 or $6 candles. But look at your hours of your business. If you're only open 9 to 4 and you have you're closed for lunch, then you're basically catering to the unemployed. Approximately 70% of retail business is transacted between the hours of 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. Show that your city and your community and your businesses are open for business and ready to attract that consumer. Encourage cross-shopping. Look at shoe stores that could be next to the clothing store. We do this all the time when we come in and look at maybe a larger development. We're trying to pair businesses together that can work together to encourage cross-shopping. We need to promote. I know a lot of folks say, well, we're out here recruiting national brands. Well, we're also increasing competition within your community. You wouldn't believe if a retailer's gone for a long time without doing anything to their business, what a little competition would do for that. So, but going back to complementary shopping, we look for these businesses all the time, but it may be looking in your community to try to find someone that can open up a complementary business to help both of you succeed. It's all about foot traffic, and it's all about increasing business in the share of that market that you can. And then lastly, encourage community involvement. If you're not, we have a saying in our office, if you're not in on it or up on it, you're probably down on it. We say a lot of times, use citywide events, holiday events, art shows, festivals, and other city promoting gatherings to get people out in the street to experience all your city has to offer. You need to have a program in place and get some of these things started to increase foot traffic and let folks know that you're open for business, and meet some of your merchants to increase those business revenues. And I'll leave you with this, but basically appearance, which is your curb appeal, the hospitality, the attitude and the business environment that you create, the welcoming spirit that you offer to outside consumers, but also your citizens alike, and then also perceived safety, crime stigma. If your community has a crime stigma of a certain area, you need to address that immediately, because those are characteristics that over time will define the overall economic vitality and identity of a community. So, I'm going to leave you with that, but I basically want to say that, all of these things are sort of minute, but also looking at the macro scale, all play into that community development aspect that create a better business environment and show that your community is open for business and ready for retailers. When we're out there in the world recruiting for your community, or if you're out there doing that or your staff's out there doing that, it's so important to know that, you know, we can introduce the market, but the next question we get is, tell us about that market. Tell us about the sites you have that's offering. What's next door? You know, what are the business practices that are there? What other retail is there? What does the crime rate look like? What does the residential growth look like? So you need to be ready to answer those questions.
Thanks, Scott. I wanted to, real quick before we get into site selection, I wanted to point out that we will be providing the presentation to everybody after the webinar. So we will make sure that everybody has that. Scott has an architecture background, so I love listening and talking to him when he starts talking about the community development standpoint, because he's been able to, some of the communities that he's worked with, do some really unique things to help out some of the aesthetics and the infrastructure improvements. So you know, really important. So retail site selection, this is a topic we could talk a few hours on, but we'll do it in a few minutes. So really wanted to kind of introduce the process. You know, there's a lot of information out there, some right, some wrong. You know, it's kind of different depending on the retailers that you talk to, but we really wanted to kind of introduce the site selection process from the retail side of it. I mean, it's a little bit different than when you start talking about the industry or the business side of site selection. So we're going to talk about the process, you know, and some of the key things from a community standpoint that you need to focus on to really elevate the community and position the community to attract those site selectors. You know, this is my definition. So you know, basically when I talk about site selection, it's an elimination process to minimize the uncertainty and reduce risk. These site selectors many times are representing multiple state regions, you know, and they are absolutely working through the process to reduce and minimize, eliminate the risk associated with opening up the new sites. They want to be absolutely sure that the market demands of the store are met when they open up these sites. You know, on average, a site selector he'll analyze 10 different sites for every one that's selected. You know, so it's really important from a community standpoint, and certainly one of the things that we focus on with the communities that we represent is to make sure that the communities are elevated in that process, and make sure that when these site selectors are working through their criteria, that they're giving the communities a second look, that they're looking past the initial demographic information, you know, looking past the initial retail trade area, to make sure that the communities in their eyes are represented as accurately and properly and aggressively as possible. So it's definitely something that we as a company have to understand, and we wanted to introduce that to you to understand kind of what they're looking for and how we can improve from a community standpoint. You know, so the overall process and what I'm looking at, you know, there's a lot of different criteria these site selectors look for. It looks different based off of the retailer, the restaurant that they represent, the category of retail that they represent. But a study was done a few years ago by ICSC, and basically they interviewed about 50 different retail site selectors. And so the overall, and they combined all that information to kind of come up with some summaries. But basically, from the site selection standpoint, it's a 4-step process. It looks a little different, you know, for every single company, but first off, they're determining that expansion quota. You know, that might look like we're going to open up 4 stores in the southeastern United States by 2020, or that might look like we're going to represent, you know, we're going to open up 5 different stores in Phoenix, Arizona by the end of the year. You know, it looks a little bit different, you know, determining on their expansion rates and who they represent. But overall, every site selector is working off of a quota and a geographic region. Post 2009, or when the downturn came in, most of these site selectors, like I said, are representing multiple state regions. You know, so they're processing a lot of different opportunities. They're looking at a lot of different communities. You know, and so when they move into the market analysis standpoint and phase of the process, they're on the surface, they're pulling retail trade area information, they're pulling demographics, psychographics, leakage analysis. They're looking at that. They've typically, most of, especially when you start talking about the national retailers, they've got the third party data, the Nielsen, Claritas, the census information, but it's so important that all that information is readily available, because across the entire survey that they did, most, if not all, of the retailers all specify that they do look at the community information provided on the website, because they want to verify the data that they're pulling from their own software and their own capabilities. So it's really important from the market analysis standpoint. I mentioned multiple state territories. They're looking at a lot of different communities within the region to possibly open up their stores. So it's really important that this information is upfront, readily available to them, accurate, up to date. We want to make sure, we have 2016 information. They're not looking at 2014 information. It's really important that we have that readily available for them, because this is the part of the process when I talked about it's an elimination process. This is when the community can be eliminated without anybody in the community ever knowing. This is the phase that's so important, that we want to make sure the communities that we represent get a second look and are pushed at the top of the list for the potential openings. From there, once they kind of develop, what they're looking for, they have kind of a small number of different communities they're looking for. Then that starts their groundwork and site analysis. Sometimes, many times the community won't even know that they're there. This is where they're going into the community. They're looking at some of those things that Scott was just talking about from the community development standpoint. They're analyzing those barriers to entry. Are there blighted areas? Are there ingress, egress issues, with some of the sites they're looking for? They're looking at those site-specific details to make sure that the market analysis that they've done on the surface is verified when they get in the community. And then once they combine the market analysis, they combine the kind of their groundwork and their analysis, each one looks a little bit different, but then they're all kind of running it through their proprietary calculations, the return on investment. I talked about earlier, retailers today, site selectors today, it absolutely has to be a sure thing. There's no, speculation on sites. They're not going to open up a site in a fringe location because they think that the residents, will move that direction. That some of that went on pre-09, but it's just not happening anymore. And so this is a very rigorous, very data-heavy process. And one of the things we want to make sure is that from the market analysis standpoint, we're making it as easy as possible. We want, from a company standpoint, one of our biggest focuses is the communities that we represent. We want to make sure that they are absolutely portrayed in the best light possible when these site selectors are looking on where to expand. We want to make sure that all that information is readily, tangible, updated, so that they don't have to do any more, they don't have to spend any more time on the analysis standpoint, because many times when they're looking at a quota in a big region, they'll move on to the next community. They're looking for that sure thing, for that low-hanging fruit. And so it's really important to kind of understand their process and where the market analysis of the community comes into play. So during that survey, one of the things, and I'm just going to highlight a few of these, some of the things, the most common indicators that each of these retailers kind of talked about. Basically, a pretty robust view at the demographics. They absolutely want to know what the market that they're looking at is. What is it today? What can it be in the future? And I have a few stars on a few of these, and I just wanted to point a few of them out. Daytime population. One of the things throughout the survey that most site selectors kind of revealed was daytime population. A lot of times it's hard for them to not only quantify but qualify. So one of the things we do as a company is we want to make sure that, if you're a bedroom community and 70% of the workforce is leaving the community during the day, what does that 30% still in the community look for? I grew up in a suburb of Houston. For a long time we struggled to get some of those sit down restaurants because of the daytime population. There was a perceived live here versus work here disparity. Well, one of the things that we like to do is when we spend time in the community is what is that live here population? What does that 30% of the people remaining in the community in the day represent? I mean, is it moms with multiple kids who will go out to eat, for lunch? What is it? Is it in a lot of communities, what's hard to quantify sometimes is the people that work from home, with the e-commerce. A lot of people are working from home. So that daytime population is one thing that we really want to focus on to qualify and quantify, because sometimes that's hard information for these site selectors to obtain. Median income. Pretty much most site selectors will go off of median income. With the macroeconomic changes in the country today, and you've got the disparity between the lower income and the higher income, the median income is a much more accurate portrayal of the income level of the community. Sometimes the average household income can be skewed by a select few on both sides of the economic spectrum. So make sure when the numbers from the community, make sure that the median income is available, because most site selectors, that's what they're looking for. Pedestrian traffic. I mean, want to make sure that when we spend time in the community that we're trying to quantify that. What are these developments? What is this downtown? What is this lifestyle center? What does this represent from a traffic standpoint? And this is information that the independent business owners, in the community, that if we can provide that, maybe we can help spur some business owners or potential business owners. Population change. This is one thing that the site selectors really, it's hard for them to understand, because they don't have the ability to spend time in the community. You know your community way better than they are. And one of the things from a company standpoint that we want to focus on is this population change. We want to know that there's 2 major residential developments coming in the next year, and 70% of those households are already sold out. That's information that the site selectors don't always have. They're very leery of population change, and so they want to know that market when they open up that site. And they're looking at this investment from a long-term standpoint. So that's one thing, the population change, I wanted to highlight, that you really want to highlight. If there's new developments coming within the community, that needs to be highlighted on the website, because that's something that's really, really attractive, and that's something that's important for these site selectors to understand. And visibility. Have to market the sites. Have to make it as easily available to them so that they know, okay, I'm interested in the community, what are the sites available? We like to say, when we work with the community, we take sites available initially when we start talking about these retailers, because the quickest way to go from interest to action is to make sure that not only get them interested in the community, but have a site available so they can take action on that. So I wanted to highlight a few of those. And real quick, and we're going to talk about this in more detail. I know I'm getting short on time, but the retail trade area. So the days of a 5 mile, 10 mile, 15 mile, 20 mile radius, drive time, radials, that's not the level of detail that these site selectors and these retailers are looking for today. They want a customized polygon so that it's a true, accurate reflection of what that trade area is. And from the community standpoint, it's really important that you understand that, because one of the things that when we're around the country is making sure that the communities are not selling themselves short. If you're a community of 50,000, but you have a retail trade area of 110,000, you want to market yourself. We want to market you as a 110,000 person community, because that's your trade area. That's your purchasing power that you demand in the eyes of the retailer. So it's really important, and we'll talk about much more detail about that. But I have this slide on here. One of the things that I challenge you to look at is, and we're doing a lot of this not only for communities but for retailers, is cell phone analysis. Is tracking where the consumers are coming from. We can go and we can talk a lot about this in detail, but it's big brother-ish, I know, but this is powerful information for retailers. It's tangible, evidence-based information of where the consumers are coming from these retail stores. So if you have any questions about that, we can talk about it in more detail, but it's a powerful representation for a retail trade area. And so real quick, implications for city officials. So based off of that survey, these are kind of 6 different things that for city officials, economic development, corporations to focus on. Ease of access to data. The most reported from all the surveys is the lack of evidence of market demand is the most cited barrier to entry, meaning if the site selectors can't get enough information on the community to justify that the demand is there, they're going to move on to the next community. So making sure that all that information is readily and tangible to them is extremely important, to attract these site selectors and these retailers to the community. Promote a friendly business environment. Scott talked about that. Existing retailers are critical. Having a good relationship with those existing retailers, especially talking about these national retailers, they absolutely are going to talk to the current business owners. They're going to know the market, from the business environment. They want to know that information. They demand that information. So make sure, you're promoting that. Make sure you've got a good relationship with the current business owners. Be able to communicate the critical data indicators. And I have this, everyone needs to have the same story. Whether it's city official, economic developer, chamber of commerce, make sure that the community as a whole has the same story. What are the demographics of the community? Where does the community want to go from a retail-based standpoint? Making sure everyone's on the same page. And that's one thing that we like to focus on, do a lot of stakeholder meetings to make sure that everybody understands the true potential of the community from a retail-based standpoint. So that's really important, especially when these site selectors get into the community. Make sure that everyone has the same story so they're not getting conflicting information, because ambiguity, conflicting information, will lead them to look elsewhere. Understand the current retail base. Retailers pay attention to how the complementary stores are doing. So know who is successful and who's not. And I know when you start talking about varying community sizes, and there's a tremendous amount of retailers. So one of the things I like to talk about is, make sure you understand your regional and super regional retailers. Make sure you understand how they're doing. And then from there, make sure you look at the different category types. Make sure, how are the fast casual restaurants versus the sit down doing? How are the sporting goods doing? How are your off-price retailers? By category, how are each of those doing? And it doesn't have to be specific, sales information, but just have a general idea, for when the site selector conversations come up, because it's verifiable data of what the market and the residents demand, and provides them assurance of opening up a store. I talked about it. Highlight future development plans. This is one thing that's really hard for these site selectors to get, but make sure you highlight where the community is going. That's important information for these site selectors. So you want to highlight that as a community. And sites. Mary Morgan is a retail recruiter for our company. She talks about multiple times when she's in contact with these retailers, the first thing they ask is, okay, we're interested, what are some sites available? So we want to market the sites. You as a community keep an online, database of available sites, because that's when you start talking about site selectors in a multi-state region, it's really important that that's available to them so that they don't move on to a community that might have that information. They're working. A lot of times they're stretched really thin, So those are 6 different things I wanted to highlight, based off of the retailer survey and what these site selectors are looking for. Real quick, what kind of some of these customer profiles look at. Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, they're looking for a 60,000 plus median income. They're looking for college educated, well-read, well-traveled. This kind of goes into the psychographics. They really have a good understanding of, who are the residents in the community and what is their purchasing habits. They're looking for 60% owner-occupied homes, because that's their typical consumer base. Like I said, these retailers have never had this amount of information, so it's that much more important, and they have more specified criteria. Starbucks, it's not expensive to have a Starbucks habit. And so they know that, and their business model requires, they're looking for 50,000 median income. They know that there has to be some disposable income. Once again, they're looking for typically some college education or higher. They're looking at that education obtainment, and they need a mix of both employees and residential. So it's specific information. Pet supermarket. This is a retailer typically in the southeast United States. Look at them. They're going into population density, median income, owner-occupied homes. They specify a square footage, and they want to be in a certain distance from their competitors. So these are all things that these site selectors are looking for, and you can really start to understand from their perspective how difficult it is when you start talking about a multiple state region or a lot of stores that they're opening up. They're working off of quick, immediate impressions of the community. So it's that important to have that information readily available to them. And lastly, this comes up a lot when you start talking about incentives. We've talked about it multiple times. Retailers are looking for the sure thing. A retailer is not going to open up a store if the demographics, the market base, the customer base, the site is not, if it's not applicable and it's not appealing to their business model, they're not going to open up a store there just because there's incentives offered. They have all their criteria, and they're going to look at that, and that's going to base where they open up their sites. People and population matter. Now, that's not to say, if they've got competing communities that they're looking at, certainly they're going to look at the incentives offered, but that's secondary to the people and the population. And so I wanted to leave with that because it's really important, as a community to understand that incentives are not going to attract, especially when you start talking about these national retailers. Now, you got to understand, you got to understand how to play the game. And if you've got, competing communities around you that are offering incentives, then you need to look at that. And that's one thing that we really do is we spend a lot of time understanding the metro area and the competing communities, because that's how these site selectors are looking at it. They're not looking at city ordinances. They're not looking at city limits. They're looking at where the market base is best for their site and for their store. I know that we went through a lot of information. I know that we're past our time. Like I said, we will be sending out this presentation to each one of you. I encourage you to reach out to us. We've got some questions that we'll follow up on. We will reach out to everyone individually, make sure that all those are answered. I really appreciate the time, and I look forward to the next webinar here in a few weeks, and that's where we'll really get into some of the detailed reporting and data that's important to these retailers. So once again, I really appreciate your time. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be sending you that information here shortly. Thanks.
Bryce, I want to reiterate too, kind of what you were saying is we appreciate your time, but we also welcome your questions in any format, please. So we'll try to answer some of these questions.
If there's no questions out there, I guess we'll go ahead and end the webinar, and you'll be hearing from us, and we look forward to just talking to you again here in a few weeks. Thank you.
Hey there, everybody. Any of these last-minute questions that are coming in, please be looking forward to our responses in email. Please do not hesitate to continue sending questions in, or if you contact us at info@theretailcoach.net, you can just there as well, and we will respond.